Music theory with OneNote. Scales built by negative intervals or modal distance, in other words, traveling in the counterclockwise or negative direction, focusing in on the major modes, which are the Ionian mode, otherwise known as the major scale, the Lydian mode, and the Mixolydian mode. So get ready and some coffee, because although we're just playing with one note, it's a beautiful note. You're not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of Modal Node System, MNS Presentation 1326, OneNote scales built by negative intervals or modal distance, major modes, list of presentations, which we plan on adding plenty more to shortly. Also noting, within this OneNote presentation, we'll spend our time on music theory, but we have another similarly numbered and named presentation, building these tables in Excel, practicing Excel music and table visualization skills at the same time. We're going to continue our discussion of intervals, this time going in the negative or counterclockwise direction, a direction most people are very not good at, in part because the tools are not great for going in the negative or counterclockwise direction. We're also looking at the intervals that are going to be within a scale. In other words, the ones that don't land us in the ocean when we think about our analogy, comparing and contrasting those distances from each of the 7 destination locations through the different scales and modes. So let's get a reminder of the analogy we want to be keeping in our mind that helps us to visualize the fretboard in the way that is the most efficient. That being the fretboard as a map of the territory, similar to the globe, having 7 continent or destination locations, 5 non-destination locations like the oceans that we like to go through to get to the destination locations of the continents. Our head is above the fretboard, above the world here, above this low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling. We note that the fretboard can be spinning around, rotating like the planets, and we give it 12 degrees of rotation, typically picking the 4th degree of rotation, the 12 degrees, of course, being like the 12 notes in the musical alphabet. We pick number 4, which is C, so the collection of 7 notes around C major. Once we pick that view, we no longer want to label it by the note names because that's inefficient. We'd rather name it by the thing that remains the same, Nashville numbers, if you're used to those, which are basically a modal system naming, meaning 1 is the Ionian, 4 is the Lydian, 3 is the Phrygian. Now, if we were to move up to C sharp or D sharp, and so on and so forth, just like the globe spinning around, all of the continents would be spinning around and still have the same relative positions. That's why it's more efficient to be looking at it this way. And so now we want to look at the intervals. The intervals have a problem because the scale degrees pull us out of that most efficient way to be measuring things, to be viewing things. We're looking at intervals this time that land us on the continents. So we want to just think about those intervals that are going to hit us on the continents. We have 2 measuring tools, one being what I would call modal half steps, in other words, continent to continent distances, or similarly, scale degrees, which make the continent that you're on the 1, basically mismeasuring. And then we have the note distance, which would be like continents and ocean distances. And the way we want to be thinking about these intervals is they're giving us how many oceans and continents, how many notes does it take to get to a certain continent distance. So in other words, if I'm on this Ionian, let's do this Ionian, and I want to get to 2 continents up, meaning I'm going to go here, 1, 2 up, which would be the 3rd scale degree. If you use this as the 1, 1, 2, 3, how many continents and oceans or total distance in notes is that? It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I can go to the Lydian and say, well, if I go 4 continents and oceans up, will I also get to the 2nd modal half step or 3rd scale degree? Yes, you will. 1, 2, 3, 4. But if we went from the Aeolian and I want to get to the 2nd modal half step or 3rd scale degree, how many continents and oceans is it? 1, 2, 3. It's 3 notes up because there's no ocean between these 2 notes. That's basically what we're doing. And then we want to get an idea of the flavor of each of those distances. And if we do that, we can drop the silly letters that aren't adding anything, such as big M's, small m's, and the P's for perfect, major, minor, perfect. Those aren't really adding anything if you say the distance. Now, the problem is now we're going in the negative direction or counterclockwise. On the guitar, that would be going down towards the floor, towards the skinny strings, or to the right. Those are both going, in the up in pitch direction. And but we now want to go counterclockwise, meaning left on the circle. So remember, directionality is a thing. And oftentimes in music theory, we kind of convince ourselves that it's not. Meaning, like if I'm going from this Ionian to the Lydian, we don't really have a great name for it. So what we end up doing is taking the inverse as though we're measuring from the Lydian to the Ionian. We try to figure out some kind of workaround, which sometimes ignores the fact that directionality is a thing. We have a racetrack. We're going around clockwise. We can go around counterclockwise. So if I'm looking at these two, if I'm looking at this Ionian and this Aeolian, I should be able to measure from the Ionian to the Aeolian and from the Aeolian to the Ionian. And because we're going around the racetrack, all we need is directionality and distance. So meaning if I'm going from the Aeolian to the Ionian, it's 1, 2, 3 up. So, or clockwise. If I'm going to the Ionian to the Aeolian, it's 1, 2, 3 backwards or counterclockwise. So the problem is our scale conventions don't have a great term for going backwards or counterclockwise. So we kind of have to shoehorn in the terminology because we do need that functionally to go backwards. In other words, if I'm going from this Ionian to this Aeolian, I'm asking the question, if I went counterclockwise or backwards 2 modal half steps, which you would think would be the 1, 2, 3 negative third scale degree, but we don't have negative scale degrees because the scale degrees, because their measurement was wrong, doesn't really make sense going backwards. It gets all messed up. So some people will say negative third scale degree, but many people don't. And so we kind of lose the scale degrees. And the question would be, what's the distance in continents and oceans? Well, if you use modal half steps, it's going to be 1, 2, 3. So it's 3 continents and oceans to get 1, 2, the negative second modal half step back, which would be the negative third scale degree. And we can compare those going that direction as well. If I went forward this way, then it would be 5 here, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 forward, or 1, 2, 3 backwards, because 12 minus 3 would be 9, right? All right, so keeping that in mind, we're going to go through these in the counterclockwise direction. We have our 12 notes in our musical alphabet. We selected the ones that are in the key of C because that's what we're typically working with. So we go whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step to get those. Here's our 7 notes. So when we're measuring, we can go around this as a circle. It repeats here. Or we can go this way, which has continents and oceans, the total notes. Now, our normal naming convention, we just listed them out that we've looked at in a prior section without considering whether or not we're going to land in the ocean or not. We just listed them all out. This is going clockwise, normal direction, and then up here we have the counterclockwise. Now remember, going clockwise, these are going to look familiar, and if you have a capital M or a P, you know that that's going to be in the major key, and if it has a P, then it's probably in the minor. And if it has a small m, it's probably in the minor, but not always, because the second isn't in the minor. So remember, it's not a perfect system. It's only a system that was really kind of thinking about the majors and just ignoring everything else, basically, is what we have. All right. So, but now we want to look at these distances that are actually going to not land us in the ocean and compare and contrast those intervals, this time going in the negative direction. All right. So if I was on the Ionian going forward, and if I was to build around the Ionian, put like a compass on the Ionian, like what you draw a circle with, and draw the shape around it, I can measure from that shape going forward this way to the right, right? If I picked one in the middle like here, these distances would be measuring going this way to the right or down, and then now we're going to measure above it. Now we're going to put the compass on it and draw a circle or whatever the shape is going this way with the measurements backwards or up, right? So if I was going down or to the right or clockwise around the Ionian, it would be an II, an ID, which would be a 1-2 modal range, an IP modal range, a 1-3 modal range, an IY modal range, 1-4 modal range, an IX modal range, to the Mixolydian 1-5 modal range, an IA modal range, and an IN modal range. These would be the distances to get from the Ionian mode to all of the other continents, not including the oceans. So we're not landing in the oceans at all, and these are the modal distances to get us there. So now let's say, okay, well, what would happen? Most people don't see the table going in reverse, but there is a reverse, and we need to understand that you can go backwards, right? So if I went backwards, the problem is a scale degree going backwards, because it didn't start at 0, would be a negative 2. You would think that -1 might be like a 1 would be a -1 or -2. So you would think when people talk scale degrees, they would say it's a -2 to go backwards, because you would think that 1 would still be like the -1. We kind of skipped the 0, right? But most people don't really say that, and we lose the scale degrees. If you use a modal distance terminology, modal distance, then I can say it makes sense to go 1 modal half step back. That would be like going 1 continent backwards. All right, so what would then be the distance here? Let's do it this way. The distance would be a -1 continent. So let's pick an Ionian on this side of the screen this time. Let's go with a red. Actually, let's go with the green for the Ionian. So we're on this side of the screen. Let's go from this Ionian, and then we're gonna stay on the same one, but then we'll go 1 back. So I'll do both of those, and then I'll go back to my pointer. So if we go 1 back, we're going 1 back. So this is actually in the middle. So the II right here would be we didn't go anywhere, and then we went forward. And now we're saying we're not going to go anywhere, and then we go 1 backwards. So now we go 1 backwards. That would land us on the Locrian. So it would be going Ionian back to Locrian. There's no ocean in between the Ionian and the Locrian. So what would be the modal range? It would be an IN modal range, which would be a 1-7 modal range. The modal ranges, remember, don't really tell you directionality if you just have like an IN. Meaning you could go clockwise 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or counterclockwise, because there's only 7 modes. It would be 7. It would be 1 backwards to 7, 1 back to 7. So, or you can say it's 1. Would be 0 plus 7, right? If you went back 1. So that's going to be. And by the way, I just want to point out, as we're going in the counterclockwise direction, you might ask the question, hey, aren't you making the same error? Because you might be saying, hey, look, you just said that everything is messed up because you started at 0. We started at 1 with the scale degrees instead of 0, which causes all kinds of problems because it forces us to think in terms of scale degrees instead of in a proper distance format, and we can't go in the negative direction that easily. But now you're numbering the modes with a 1 through 7. Shouldn't I be starting it at 0 through 7? And the answer is that probably would be a more proper way to do it. And so you could say, well, I sold out. You sold out. You're trying to make a coherent, logical system, and you didn't do it the most logical way. And I grant that, and that's a good argument. But the reason I think this would still work is because I don't think it causes half as many problems as this particular one causes, for reasons I don't want to get into in like detail right now. But there's a lot of pros as well to keep the numbering system 1 through 7 instead of 0 through 7, naming the mode. One is that the national number system already has that, right? So people already kind of know that, and people already know the number system, at least with the major scale, because that's the first thing we learn, and they already kind of learned that the 1, 4, 5 are the major, and the 2, 3, and 7 are the minor. So all of that would make it a lot easier to kind of transfer if I don't change it to a 0 through 7, and I'm not seeing anywhere near the problems as this numbering convention being an issue. But you could say, argue against that, say I sold out on that one, we should make that a 0 or whatever, but that's the argument. So you can check it out. All right, so we're going back 1. So that's going to be a scale degree. You would think of a -2nd scale degree, because the scale degrees are all off by 1, going in the negative, you would expect. But again, a lot of people don't use scale degrees. They just lose the term altogether. The notes, there's 1 note distance between them. And so that's going to be then a -1 major 7. Why major 7? Because I'm going to say if we take 12 minus 1, we would get 11. So on the clockwise direction, I know that 11 would be a major 7. Therefore, when I go counterclockwise, I'm going to say that the major 7 could be either going 11 forward or -1. That's how you shoehorn directionality into the current system, which doesn't really have it because we lose the scale degrees. You add the notes and then you add directionality for the notes. So that will also allow you to give distinctions for octaves as I go up an octave. Instead of having compound intervals, which only work going clockwise, you can use the notes, which allow you to go clockwise, counterclockwise, and over an octave to give you that 3rd degree of dimension, which we'll talk about later. But it would be better to say that I have a -1 from the Ionian node, negative first modal half step, remembering that that negative is flowing through to both of the numbers. Why would that make more sense? Because you'd still have the opposite going clockwise around, which would be 11 notes away from the Ionian node, 6th modal half step, because 7 minus 1 would be 6. So see, this makes sense if you're going around the block either way. And notice I can drop any term here and it would still be coherent, meaning I could just say it's a -1 note away from the Ionian, and that would be it, right? Or I could say it's an Ionian negative first modal half step, because then you can take that and figure out how many notes away if I go -1 from the Ionian. So this is giving one more piece of information than you need. You could say it's a -1, a negative first modal half step, and then then you'd have to know which node you're going from if you want to drop the I, which is basically what's being done here. You don't have the actual node that you're on. All right, so that's going to be the idea. So then, of course, if I went forward from the Ionian, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 to get to the Locrian. All right, so let's go through all of them. Let's say I go to the Lydian, which is the other mode, major mode, and let's make it red. So we'll make Lydian red. And Lydian, let's choose this one. And it's off. Let's choose that one and go, okay, let's pull that down and compare the Lydian. All right, so if I go from a Lydian and I go back 1, so now we're going to go back 1 from the Lydian, 1 modal half step negative, which you would think would be the 2nd scale degree if you made that the 1, but we don't usually use scale degrees. You land on the Phrygian. So it would be a YP modal range, but it would be going in the counterclockwise direction, meaning if we start on the 4, which is Lydian from a Nashville number system, and we're going negative direction, it would be to 3. So 4-3 modal range would be a YP modal range. All right, so we're going 1 modal half step counterclockwise, 1 continent backwards, 1 continent counterclockwise, which you would think would be -2 scale degrees if we had scale degrees going counterclockwise, and that would be notes half steps going counterclockwise 1 note backwards, because there's no ocean between as we go 1 step backwards. So normally we might call that a -1 note away major 7. Why? Because going forward, it would be 12 minus 1 or 11, which is a major 7. So again, I would you can even drop the major and just say that the 7th could be an 11 note away 7th or a -1 note away 7th, right? And those are both directionalities that are typically in the major modes, or at least 2 out of the 3 major modes, as we will soon see. So let's go then to the next one. So I would rather call it a -1 from the Lydian node, negative first modal half step. Why? Because going forward, that makes perfect sense now, because now it's an 11 note away from the Lydian node, and 7 minus 1 would be 6. So that actually makes sense. No one makes sense. Sense making is lies are more popular than truth, and sense making is less popular than nonsense. That's just how that's how music and everything is. Music in particular, it seems like these days. But that's not how it should be. That's not how it should be. Okay, let's go back from the Mixolydian. let's go to the Mixolydian, and then I'm doing it the right way. This is how it should work. Sense matters. We should try to make sense. It's good to make sense. All right, let's go back from Mixolydian. You can see now that we go back here. So now if I want to go one modal half step back, which you would think would be the second the second scale degree or negative second scale degree, I have to go 2 steps backwards instead of 1. Okay, a difference happening. So let's check that out. So if I go 1 step back from the Mixolydian, that's going to land me on the Lydian. So it'd be a Mixolydian-Lydian modal range, but counterclockwise direction. So it'd be a 5-4 modal range. Wait, that's what happened here? It'd be a 5-4 modal range because I'm going back 1 from the 5, back 1 to get to the 4. So I would say it's a -1 modal half step, which would be -2 scale degrees. If we had scale degrees, negative second scale degrees, so it would be note half steps in the negative direction is 2 this time. All right, so what does that mean then? It's going to be a -2 note away, minor 7. Why? Because 12 minus 2 would be 10. And I know, so if I was going clockwise, it would be 10. And 10 is a minor 7 instead of a major 7. Therefore, the minor 7 could be either 10 forward or -2 backwards is how I would use the current system. But I'd rather say it's a -2 note away from the Mixolydian mode, negative first modal half step. Why? Because then if I go clockwise, it would be 10 going forward from the Mixolydian node, and then 7 minus 1 would be the 6th modal half step going forward, right? So if I went forward on these, then it makes sense, because I'd go forward here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 would land me there, right? Or backwards this way. And then see, so let's go to the next one. I'm rambling. Let's say we go back 2 steps, 2 continents backwards, which would be the -3rd scale degree if we had -3 scale degrees. So -2 backwards. So let's go from each of these from the Lydian. Start there because that's our standard. We go back 2. So for me to go 2 continents counterclockwise, negative direction, what's the distance? 1, 2, 3. So you would think that would be the -3rd scale degree, but you don't have scale degrees really going backwards. What if I went from the Phrygian? If I go 2 continents backwards, -2nd modal half step, which you would think would be the -3rd scale degree, has a distance in notes, continents, and oceans 1, 2, 3. What about the Lydian? It's back in line. All of them are back in line. So now you'd be -2nd modal half step back is going to be 1, 2, 3, -3 notes back, or oceans and continents. So everything is lining up. So that means that if I go from the Ionian back to, I land on the Aeolian. Ionian to Aeolian. That's a 1/6 modal range. Why? Because because we're going to say 1 minus 2, and as we go around would be 6. Wait a second. Yeah, that's right. Because there's no 0. So we go around, there's only 7 of them. So you go from 1 backwards, gets you to 7 and then to 6. I got a little worried that I messed up here, but no, of course I didn't mess up. I know what I'm doing. So you would think that would be, so it's the -2nd modal half step, which would be the -3rd scale degree. You would think if we had negative scale degrees, but we basically don't. So the notes going backwards is 3. So -3 notes going backwards. So what are we going to call that? Well, I have to say, normally I'd say, well, if I went forward, it would be 12 minus 3, which would be 9, and that's usually a major 6. So I could say the major 6 is either going 9 forward or -3 in the opposite direction. But it would make more sense to say it's a -3 from the Ionian node, -2nd modal half step, because then it would still be 9 going clockwise, 12 minus 3 from the Ionian node. But then you can take 7 minus 2, and that would be 5 going forward in the clockwise direction. So in other words, if I go back from here, we get 1, 2, 3. If I pick an Ionian like out here and go forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we land on an Aeolian, right? Makes perfect sense. Okay, what if we go 2 back from the Lydian, 2 counterclockwise direction, 2 counterclockwise continents back? Well, then you're going to land on the Dorian, and that's going to be, then we call that a YD modal range or a 4-2 modal range, because 4 minus 2 lands you on the 2. So it's a 4-2, a YD, Lydian Dorian modal range. So you got -2 modal half steps or continents counterclockwise, which would be the -3rd scale degree if we had negative scale degrees, but we don't because the system broke when you go backwards. And then that's going to be -3 modal half step, -3 notes in the counterclockwise direction. What are we going to call that? Once again, -3 minor 6 for the same reason, because going forward it would be a 9 minor 6, so the major 6. So major 6 could go forward 9 or backwards 3, but it'd be better to call it a -3 from the Lydian node, -2nd modal half step, because going forward would be a 9 node away from the Lydian node, and then 7 minus 2 would be a 5 nodal half step going forward. So if we're on the Lydian node, 1, 2, 3 backwards, or -2nd modal half step, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 gets me on the Dorian going forward, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 continents or modal half steps going forward, which makes sense. Let's see how that makes sense, and that one doesn't. You see the difference? Sense is made, no sense, nonsense, 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 sense, nonsense. So I opt for the sense. Okay, I know it's unpopular to make sense, all right, but I do it anyways, because I don't care. I don't care what people think. I'm going to make sense of things. So what if I go on the Mixolydian and I go back 2? Then you're going to land on the Phrygian. So that's going to be a 5-3 modal range, because 5 minus 2 will land you on the 3. So you're going to go 2 modal half steps backwards, which you would think would be the -3rd scale degree if we had negative scale degrees, but we don't. So that would be -3 notes counterclockwise direction, which would be, once again, -3 major 6, because going forward would be a 9 note away major 6, but it would be better to be called a -3 Mixolydian -2nd modal half step, because going forward, once again, you'd have a 9 note away from the Mixolydian 5th modal half step, right? So if you're on the Mixolydian, you go 1, 2, 3 back, or 1, 2 modal half steps back. But if you were on like the Mixolydian going this way, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which would be the Phrygian again, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 modal half steps or continents in the clockwise direction. All right. So once again, the theme here is nonsense, sense, nonsense, sense. Okay. Or at least more sense. More sense. Logic needs to be crisper. Crisper logic in the terminology is better. So what if we go 3 modal distance counterclockwise, which you would think would be the -4th scale degree? Well, if you start from the Aeolian, and you go 3 backwards, then you're going to get to the 5, which is the Mixolydian, right? Because it goes around in a circle. So it goes 1, 7, 6, 5, right? And so then if I was here, that would be the -4th scale degree if we had negative scale degrees, but we don't. And so that's going to be then note half steps 5 counterclockwise. So what are we going to call that? A -5 perfect 5th. Why? Because going forward, 12 minus 5. Let me draw a thing here. So we can say 12 minus 5 would be 7. Boom. So it would be then a 7 note away perfect 5th. So that means a perfect 5th could be clockwise 7 or counterclockwise 5. But I'd rather call it a 5 note away from the Ionian node -3rd modal half step. Again, the 5 is the important thing, -5, and the positive 7. Those are the numbers should tell you. Otherwise, you have to take an added step that doesn't make any sense. I have to convert the P to tell me the number. but the P doesn't give me any new information, so why is it there in the first place? I could just use the number that tells me, like, okay, you don't have to get upset about it, because if you went forward, then it would be a 7 node away Ionian fourth modal half step. So, right, so if we go back 4, let me just show you let me show you it this way. Like if we went back 4 on all of these, then from the Ionian, we'd be going back 1 to the negative third modal half step backwards, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. Now notice they all have 1, 2, 3 modal half steps back, which you would think would be the fourth scale degree if we had those, and they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps backwards. Now if I went forwards from the Ionian over here on this side, I'd say it's going to be 1, 2, 3, fourth modal half step going forward gets us to the Mixolydian, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes that way, continents and oceans. Okay, so what if we go from the Lydian and we go 3 continents counterclockwise? Well, that's going to land you on the Ionian. It's a Lydian Ionian. Why? Because if you start on the 4, which is the Lydian, and you go back 3, you land on the 1, which is the Ionian, which is negative 3 modal half steps counterclockwise continents, which would be the negative fourth modal half steps. Scale degrees, if we had scale degrees negative. And how many notes away is it? It's negative 5 notes. What are we going to call that? We're going to call that a negative 5 note away perfect fifth, if you want to use that way, but I'd rather call it a negative 5 note away from the Lydian node, negative third modal half step, right? Because going forward then, it would make more sense. That's why I would do that. Because then, like, if we underline that going forward, it would be a 7 note away from the Lydian mode, and then 7 minus 3 would be fourth modal half step. So if we're on the Lydian going backwards, 1, 2, 3 gets us to the Ionian, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gets us to the Ionian, and going forward, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, wait a sec, I'm going forward now from the Lydian, that's on the Ionian. Let's go from this Lydian. 1, 2, 3, 4 gets me going forward, continents or modal half steps, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes. See, that makes sense. I feel like that's way better. Okay, let's say we go from the Mixolydian and we go back 3. We'll land on the Dorian. Why? Because the Mixolydian is 5 minus 3 lands us on 2, which is Dorian, 3 modal half steps counterclockwise, which gets to the negative fourth scale degree. Note half steps would be 5, so we would call that then a negative 5 perfect fifth, but it would better be called a negative 5 from the Mixolydian node, negative third modal half step, because going forward it makes more sense to be called a 7 note away from the Mixolydian node, fourth modal half step. So in other words, Mixolydian, if we go back 1, 2, 3, negative 3 modal half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 5 notes. But then if I'm on like Mixolydian over here and we go forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, modal half steps going forward, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes going forward. Okay, let's keep on rolling. We're running long on time. You need to speed things up. You're pulling too much time. What if we go negative 4 continents counterclockwise modal distance, which would be negative 5 scale degrees if we had those? Well, if we start on the Ionian and we go back 4, that's going to land us on the Lydian. Why? Because 1 minus 4, and there's only 7, so we're going around 1 back to 7, 6, 5, 4 is going to be to 4. And so that's going to be a 1, 4 modal range, which is a scale degree of negative 5 if we had negative scale degrees, which is note half steps of negative 7. That distance is, again, these two distances are inverses of each other, so that's going to look like it's a constant distance in the negative as well as the positive. So it's a negative 7 perfect fourth. Why? Because going the other way, 12 minus 7 would be a 5 note away perfect fourth. So the perfect fourth could be 5 clockwise or negative 7 counterclockwise. But it would better be called a 7 note away from the Ionian fourth modal half step, negative fourth modal half step. Why? Because if we're on the Ionian and I want to go back 4 modal half steps, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to move this back here to 4. What's the distance in notes, continents, and oceans? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now let's do the same thing for the Lydian. I'm going to pull this one back, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 modal half steps back. You can see a difference here. We'll get into that shortly. And if we go 4 back from the Mixolydian, 1, 2, 3, 4 modal half steps backwards. Now, if I start on the Ionian and go the other way to get to the Lydian, it's going to be 1, 2, 3 modal half steps going forward, which would be the 4th scale degree if I make that the 1, and it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 distance. So notice that 7 and 5 are inverses from each other. So both of those are going to be numbers that typically we're going to flow through on the major and minor modes oftentimes. Okay. So let's go to the next one then, and we're going to be on the Lydian. Let's say we go in the counterclockwise direction 4. We're going to land on the Locrian. Why? Because we're on the 4, which is Lydian. Minus 4 will land us on the 7. Because, again, we don't go back down to 0. We go around the circle 1 through 7. So that's going to land us on the 7, which is the Locrian 4-7 modal range in the counterclockwise direction, which would be the negative 5th scale degree if we had negative scale degrees, which is going to be note half steps, counterclockwise, continents, and oceans of 6. 6? See, that's the one. See how I say it? It's not the diminished or whatever. It's the distance. You're like, 6, that's going to be a crazy one. I don't care if it's clockwise or counterclockwise. So we can call that a negative 6 note away. It should be an augmented 4th, but this is the one that's weird in our Excel worksheet because there's 2 names for it. But so I don't want to mess with it. That's why it's red to indicate it. But the distance is the important thing here. So I would rather call it a negative 6 note away from the Lydian node, negative 4th modal half step would be what I would like to be calling it. Why? Because if I take 12 minus 6, then I would still get 6. And it would be 6 going forward from the Lydian node, negative 3rd modal half step, which would be the 4th scale degree, which would be an augmented 4th instead of a diminished 5th, 2 terms that have the same distance. All right, so that's going to be the weird one. So if I'm here and I go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 4th modal half step would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's going to be the very dissonancy sounding, very tense sounding sound. If I go forward from here, then I want to go from the Lydian to the Locrian. It's going to be 1, 2, 3 modal half steps, which would be the 4th scale degree if I make that the 1, not the 5th. That's why it's augmented, and it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Once again, distance going that way. Okay, let's go to the next one. So that's the one that's different. This is obviously a different distance than the Ionian. As we can see it going forward and backwards, I want to know that interval that's different both in the clockwise direction and in the counterclockwise direction. So there's going to be one interval difference from each of the 2 major modes compared to the main major, the Ionian mode, but that difference manifests itself both going in the clockwise direction and the counterclockwise direction, of course, that most people don't remember the counterclockwise direction. So what if we go back 4 modal half steps, 4 continents back from the Mixolydian? What continent will we land on? The Ionian. Why? Because we're on Mixolydian, which is 5. 5 minus 4 will take us around the horn. Will take us back to 1. 5 minus 4 is 1. And so that's going to be the 5th scale degree, negative 5th scale degree. If we had negative scale degrees, that would be a distance of, once again, 7. So the Mixolydian lines up to the normalcy, the 7 distance away. So we would call that a 7 note away perfect 4th, as we saw with the Ionian for the same reason, but I'd rather call it a 7 note away from the Mixolydian negative 4th modal half step, because going forward then, by the way, I should move these up. This should be here. Going forward, it would be a 5 note away from the Mixolydian. 7 minus 4 would be the 3rd modal half step going forward. So in other words, if I'm on the Mixolydian, We go backwards, negative 1, 2, 3, 4 backwards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 distance. If I go forward from Mixolydian to get to the Ionian, right here, let's do this one. We go from here, 1, 2, 3, third modal half step going forward, which would be the fourth scale degree if that was the 1. Total distance, continents, and oceans, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's go back up to the next one. And we're going to say now we're going to go 4 modal half steps backwards, which would be the -5 modal half steps backwards, which would be the -6th scale degree if we had negative scale degrees. Let's look at it first. So if we go 5 backwards from the Ionian, 5 modal half steps back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth modal half step, which would be the -6th scale degree if we had negative scale degrees, but we don't normally do that. Distance 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in continents and oceans. So -8. So what if we go back from the Mixolydian? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -5th scale degree. Distance also 8. You can see it's the same, although the pattern between them is different. If we go back from this one, once again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -5th modal half step, and you can see the distance is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so they're all the same distances for the majors. So if I go back then, 5 from the Ionian, I'm going to land on the Phrygian. Why? Because I is 1 minus 5, there's only 7, so we go 1 back to 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, gets us to the 3. 5 modal half steps back, which would be -6 scale degrees if we had negative scale degrees, which would be -8. What are we going to call that? I'm going to call it a -8 major third. Why? Because 12 minus 3 going forward would get us to the forward distance, which would be a 9. Wait a sec. No, a 3. I went the wrong way. It would be then 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. A 4 note away major third going forward. So the major third could be 4 going forward clockwise or 8 going backwards counterclockwise. I would rather call it a -8 note away from the Ionian node, -5th modal half step, because it would still be 4 clockwise then, Ionian node, but 7 minus 5 would be 2 going forward clockwise. So in other words, if I started on the Ionian here, if I was on this Ionian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get to the Phrygian going backwards. If I'm on this Ionian, 1, 2 modal half steps to go forward, which would be the third scale degree if I make that the 1, which has a total distance of 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 note away from the Ionian node, second modal half step. Okay, so then if we do the same for the Lydian, this is the distinct interval, by the way. Most people know that 4 notes away going forward is the major third, which is a defining interval to say if it's a major or minor scale, 4 notes away being major, 3 minor. But they don't really know 8 notes away backwards. Should give you the same sense that that's going to be the distinguishing interval, 8 counterclockwise. So if I'm on the Lydian and I go back then 8 modal half steps, 8 continents, I'd land on the Aeolian. So it'd be a Lydian Aeolian modal range. Why? Because 4 minus 5 is going to take us around the horn, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 7, 6, right? It's going to be a 4, 6 modal range, back 5 modal half steps, which would be scale degrees, 6 scale degrees, -6. If we had negative scale degrees, it's going to be a distance of -8 in modal half steps, continents and ocean counterclockwise, which will once again give us the -8 major third, because going forward, it would be a 4 note away major third. So I would rather call it, however, a -8 note away from the Lydian node, -5th modal half step, because going forward or clockwise, it would be a 4 note away from the Lydian node, -2nd modal half step. So let's just take a look at that. We're going to say, okay, if I'm on the Lydian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -5 going backwards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I'm on the Lydian here going forwards and I want to get to the Aeolian, 1, 2 modal half steps going forward, which is the third scale degree, if I make that the 1, has a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4 notes. So let's do the next one. We're going to say, what if I'm on the Mixolydian and I go back 5. I'm going to land then on the Locrian. Why? Because the Mixolydian is the 5th, and then the 5 minus 5 is not going to land you on 0 because we're going around the circle, lands you on 7. And so then we're going to say the scale degree would be negative 6 if we had those. And then the note half step going backwards, once again, negative 8, which we would call, for the same reason, same rationale, a negative 8 note away major third, which I'd rather call a negative 8 note away, this time from the Mixolydian mode, negative 5th modal half step, because going forward, it would be a 4 note away from the Mixolydian node, negative 2nd modal half step. So in other words, if I'm on the Mixolydian, and I go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 5 modal half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 steps back. If I'm on this Mixolydian, let's say this Mixolydian going forward to the Locrian, 1, 2 modal half steps going forward, which would be the 3rd scale degree if I make that the 1, 1, 2, 3, and it would be a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4, and continents and oceans, or notes in other words. Okay, so let's say we go back 6. And we start on the Ionian, we go back 6. So that's going to land us then on the Dorian. Why? Because the Ionian is 1. 1 minus 6 is going to take us to 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And then we're going to say that means the scale degree would be negative 7 if we had scale degrees, but we typically don't. And so then we're going to say that the distance, note half steps backwards, is negative 10. What are we going to call that? A negative 10 major second. Why? Because 12 minus 10 would be a 2 note away major second. Therefore, the major second could be 2 forward clockwise or 10 counterclockwise. But I'd rather call it a 10 note away from the Ionian node, negative 6 modal half step. Negative 10 note away from the Ionian node, negative 6 modal half step, because going forward would then be 2 note away from the Ionian node, negative 1st modal half step. So in other words, if we go back from the Ionian, another step back, just have enough room. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Negative 6 modal half step is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What if I went forward from the Ionian to get to the Dorian? It would be 2, 4. It would be 1st modal half step, which would be the 2nd scale degree if I make that the 1, which would have a distance of 2, 1, 2 continents and oceans. Similarly, we'll have a similar prospect if we go back from the Lydian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 modal half steps backwards, and from the Mixolydian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 modal half steps back from the Mixolydian. Let's analyze those. We should have similar results on those as we compare them. So if we go back from the Lydian, back 6 continents, counterclockwise 6 modal half steps, we land on the Mixolydian. Why? Because the Lydian is 4. 4 minus 6 as we go around will get us to the 5. It'd be 4, 3, 2, 1, 7, 6, 5, right? As we go around the circle. So negative modal half steps of 6 will give us the negative 7 scale degree. And then we've got the negative 10 note half steps backwards, which would give us the same negative 10 major second. Going forward, it would be 12 minus 10, which would be a 2 note away major second. I'd rather call it a negative 10 note away Lydian, negative 6 modal half step. Why? Because if I was on the Lydian, we'd say it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 going backwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 going backwards or negative. If I'm going forward to the Mixolydian from Lydian, it would be the 1st modal half step, which would be the 2nd scale degree, 1, 2, which would be then the a distance of 1, 2 this way, right? 1, 2 notes, continents, and oceans away, notes away. All right, let's go from the Mixolydian, wrap this thing up. What if we're on the Mixolydian and we go up, we go back 6 continents? Well, we're going to land on the Aeolian. Why? Because the Mixolydian is 5. 5 minus 6 is going to take us 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 7, 6. Right? And that means if I go back 6 modal half steps, it should be the -7 scale degree if we had -7 scale degrees, but we don't. So it's still -10 distance, which will still give us a 10 note away major second, but I'd still rather call it a -10 note away, this time from the Mixolydian node -6 modal half step. Why? Because going forward, it would be a 2 note away from the Mixolydian first modal half step. So if we look at the Mixolydian, then we're on the Mixolydian. We go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, -6 modal half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, -10 steps going forward from the Mixolydian to get to the Aeolian is 1 modal half step going forward. If I make this the 1, it would be the second scale degree. If I count notes going forward, it would be 1, 2. 2 notes going forward, continents and oceans. All right, now if you have this in Excel, you can hide a lot of these columns and compare the modal ranges, compare the intervals, in whichever format you want. Some comparisons you might make, for example, is you might say, maybe I'm just going to line up the Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian, and then just compare the ranges as they're normally shown. So I go -1 step back. What's that going to be? A -1 major 7, -1 major 7 for the Lydian, -2 minor 7 for the Mixolydian, and compare that to the going forward direction. And what if I go back 2, then that would be a -3 major third, a -3, major 6, -3 major 6, -3 major 6 going forward. It would be a 9 note away major 6. So what if I go back 3 continents? That'd be a -5 note away perfect 5th all the way across. And what if I go back then 4? That would be a -7 perfect 4th. This is where the Lydian is strange. It's an outlier having that 6 note away distance. What if I go back then 5 continents? That's going to be a -8 note away major 3rd all the way across. Now notice that these numbers don't really help you right, with the naming convention, because the scale degrees fall apart, whereas the scale degrees going forward tell you what position. In essence, they're telling you how many continents away, although they're using the first continent as the one you're starting on. So that's why, so you could try to look at it this way and try to compare it under the current naming convention, which would be a little bit more easy to say, okay, now I'm going 1 continent back. What does that mean? I'm going 1 continent back from the Ionian mode, which would be the -1st modal half step, and it would be more easy to convert it to go into clockwise, which would be an 11 note away Ionian 6. So now this kind of makes sense going counterclockwise. This doesn't, but you can shoehorn the tools to work so that you can actually use directionality, which is something that actually exists and you want to know about and use. So this is a -1 Lydian, and then here's the difference, -2 Mixolydian, -1st modal half step. So that's the difference going forward and clockwise and counterclockwise. Most people know it this way, going clockwise, but not this way, going counterclockwise. So then we can go back this way, and you can see the comparisons again using this measuring format. And then maybe you want to show all of them. Maybe you want to show both of these side by side to look at the 2 side by side. You can hide the columns to check it out that way. And then later on, we will add the minor modes, and you can do the same comparisons for the minor. So remember how you normally want to do this, just from a logistical standpoint, is remember the Ionian going clockwise and then compare the other modes to it, which are going to have 1 interval difference, that being Lydian and Mixolydian to the Ionian. And then remember the Ionian going counterclockwise and compare the other 2 to it. And then add the main minor, the Aeolian, which is what we'll do next time, but going counterclockwise. First, you want to do the Aeolian going clockwise and compare the other 2 modes to it, as well as possibly the Locrian, which is the Dorian and the Dorian, and I lost it, the Phrygian, right? And then those have 1 interval difference from the main minor, and then go in the counterclockwise direction doing the same thing. All right.